Hey, secrets always sound more shocking when they come from the people behind the camera. Hi, everyone. For years, millions of fans only saw BTS under the spotlight, but the staff, producers, choreographers, and crew witnessed a completely different side that cameras rarely captured. Some confessions were surprisingly heartwarming, others revealed just how exhausting perfection could be. So, let's uncover 7 unforgettable stories from the people who worked closest with BTS. Number 7. Jin, BTS. When people think about Jin, they usually picture the member who makes everyone laugh. The man confidently introducing himself as worldwide handsome. The oldest member who never misses a chance to turn an awkward moment into comedy. But according to people who have worked behind the scenes with BTS, that cheerful image only tells half of the story. What surprised many staff members wasn't just how funny Jin was. It was how seriously he took everyone else's comfort before his own. Long before BTS became a global phenomenon, filming schedules often stretched from early morning until long after midnight. The cameras only captured the performances. The audience only saw polished stages. But behind those stages were dozens of exhausted camera operators, stylists, coordinators, makeup artists, lighting engineers, and production assistants trying to keep everything running. One production staff member recalls that after an unusually long shoot, everyone looked completely drained. The atmosphere had become quiet. People were simply trying to finish their jobs as quickly as possible. Then Jin suddenly walked toward the crew instead of returning directly to the waiting room. A staff member says he thanked every department one by one. Another crew member responds, "Most artists wave and leave because they're exhausted too, but Jin stayed to greet people personally. It wasn't part of the schedule. Nobody asked him to do it. There were no cameras recording that moment." And that's exactly why many crew members remembered it. The contrast was striking. On camera, Jin looked like someone who never took anything seriously. Off camera, he quietly paid attention to the people most viewers never noticed. That same attitude continued as BTS popularity exploded around the world. The venues became larger. The security became tighter. The schedules became even more demanding. Yet stories about Jin treating staff respectfully never really changed. In behind-the-scenes interviews for Run Jin, members of the production team described him as consistently friendly, polite, and authentic even while handling physically demanding filming schedules. The show's writer explains that Jin repeatedly told the team, "Feel free to really put me through the grinder and make it hard on me," because he wanted to create something meaningful for ARMY after returning from military service. Another producer says everyone expected him to complain during difficult shoots. Instead, he kept encouraging the crew while pushing himself through every challenge. Even the Hallesen mountain climb became less about proving himself and more about creating an unforgettable experience for viewers and the staff working alongside him. But being the oldest member wasn't always easy. There was pressure that fans rarely saw. As BTS entered unfamiliar markets around the world, expectations surrounding Jin also changed. Some questioned whether his quieter personality fit the image of a global superstar. Others focused on superficial things instead of recognizing the emotional responsibility he carried as the eldest member. Yet instead of responding publicly to criticism, Jin often answered with actions. During interviews, his words remained remarkably simple. Jin says, "I just hope anyone who likes me is happy." It sounds like an ordinary sentence. But when production teams spent months watching him work, many realized those words reflected the way he actually treated people every day. One assistant says the first person to thank the crew after filming was often Jin. Another stylist responds that even after hours of wardrobe changes and repeated takes, he never treated anyone like they were invisible. Small gestures gradually became unforgettable memories. That's something audiences rarely think about. Fans remember the performance. Crew members remember the kindness. Those are two completely different perspectives. Perhaps that's why so many behind-the-scenes workers continue mentioning Jin years after projects have ended. Not because he created dramatic headlines. Not because he demanded special treatment. But because consistency leaves a stronger impression than grand speeches. A producer says, "You notice the artists who only act politely when cameras are around." Another crew member immediately answers, With Jeon, it never felt like acting. That reputation wasn't built in one concert. It wasn't created in one interview. It was built through hundreds of ordinary days that nobody outside the production team ever witnessed. And maybe that's the biggest irony of all. The funniest member often left his deepest impression during the moments when he wasn't trying to be funny at all. But that was only the beginning. Because the next confession reveals a BTS member whose perfectionism quietly pushed everyone around him to become better, even when it made filming much harder. Number 6. RM, BTS. Most fans know RM as BTS's calm and intelligent leader. The member who always seems to have the right words. The one who carries interviews, speeches, and difficult conversations with quiet confidence. But people who have actually worked beside him tell a far more complicated story. Behind that calm smile was someone who constantly questioned himself. Someone whose relentless pursuit of perfection often became the biggest challenge for everyone working around him. During the production of his documentary Right People, Wrong Place, the creative team spent nearly 8 months following RM through the making of his second solo album. What they discovered wasn't simply a world-famous artist. They found a leader who refused to stop searching for something better. Director Seokjin Lee says the documentary captured countless conversations because RM constantly reflected on every decision instead of simply moving on. The production team explains that the film wasn't just about making music. It was about documenting the emotional journey of Namjoon trying to understand himself beyond the global image of RM. That difference changed everything behind the scenes. One producer says, "We thought we were documenting an album." Another team member responds, "Eventually we realized we were documenting someone trying to answer questions he couldn't escape." Every recording session became another conversation. Every shoot became another opportunity to improve. Every creative choice was examined again and again. For the staff, that level of dedication was inspiring. It was also exhausting, because perfection rarely follows a schedule. Sometimes a scene would continue much longer than originally planned. Sometimes RM wanted to discuss an emotion before deciding whether it truly belonged in the project. Instead of chasing speed, he chased honesty. Director Seokjin Lee explains that RM's openness required tremendous courage because millions of people already believed they knew who he was. Yet he continued revealing uncomfortable parts of himself with remarkable sincerity. Co-director Jimin says watching RM made the team want to become more sincere in their own work because his concern for other people appeared naturally throughout the production process. But the pressure didn't stop there. Being BTS's leader meant carrying expectations that most people never even considered. When interviews became difficult, RM answered first. When misunderstandings appeared, RM often spoke for the group. When the future seemed uncertain, everyone looked toward him. Fans usually saw confidence. The production team often saw responsibility. RM himself has openly admitted that leadership forced him to constantly seek balance between the public image called RM and the private person named Namjoon. RM says, "I always told myself, focus on balance." Then he admits even his emotional ups and downs are still part of who he is. That honesty became one of the documentary's emotional centerpieces. The irony was impossible to ignore. People around the world admired RM because he looked fearless. The people standing closest to him admired him because they knew he wasn't. They saw someone choosing courage despite uncertainty. That inspired the entire production team. One filmmaker says, "He keeps revealing who he is with so much sincerity." Another crew member answers, "That takes incredible bravery when the whole world already has an opinion about you." Even outside the documentary, collaborators continued describing the same pattern. A Team RM member recalls that despite endless filming across multiple countries with almost no sleep, RM never appeared irritated with the crew. Instead, he remained focused until the final shot. The staff member says, "His concentration and determination were astonishing." Another collaborator replies that RM's kindness immediately made first-time staff members feel comfortable, even during the most demanding schedules. Those moments never became viral headlines. They weren't dramatic scandals. They were quiet examples of professionalism repeated over hundreds of ordinary days. And perhaps that's why so many people who worked with RM describe him in similar ways. Not as someone obsessed with being perfect, but as someone who refused to stop growing. The cameras captured BTS's leader. The crew witnessed Kim Namjoon struggling, learning, questioning, and improving every single day. That human side became the confession many staff members remembered most. But that wasn't even the biggest surprise. Because the next confession comes from a member whose quiet personality hid one of the strongest work ethics the BTS staff had ever witnessed. Number 5. J-Hope BTS. If one BTS member completely changed the atmosphere behind the scenes, staff members say it was J-Hope. Fans know him as BTS's sunshine. The member whose laughter fills every rehearsal room. The performer who somehow smiles even during the most exhausting choreography. But according to people who worked closely with him, that bright personality wasn't simply natural. It was a responsibility he consciously chose to carry. And that decision often came at a personal cost. Long before BTS became stadium headliners, dance rehearsals frequently lasted well into the night. Every missed beat meant starting over. Every camera angle demanded another take. Fatigue slowly spread across the practice room. One choreographer says, "Everyone was exhausted." Another staff member responds, "Then Hoseok walked in smiling like rehearsal had just started." The room changed almost instantly, not because the work became easier, but because his energy made people believe they could keep going. That pattern continued for years. In interviews, J-Hope has openly admitted that he never treats a performance lightly. He explains that after BTS's global breakthrough, he became even more critical of himself. J-Hope says, "I felt responsible for making the dances stand out." He adds that he constantly reviewed performances, corrected mistakes, and practiced repeatedly because millions of people were watching BTS for the first time. For him, talent was never enough. Preparation had to speak louder than confidence. The pressure behind that mindset was enormous. Every comeback introduced a new concept. Every stage demanded fresh choreography. Every awards show raised expectations even higher. One performance director says, "Most artists relax after a successful show." Another crew member replies, "Hoseok went straight to watching the replay." He wasn't looking for compliments. He was searching for flaws. That relentless attention to detail inspired the entire production team. It also meant rehearsals often continued far longer than originally planned. Because if one movement didn't fully express the music, J-Hope believed it deserved another attempt. Then another. And sometimes another. The irony was impossible to ignore. Fans admired his effortless performances. The staff witnessed how much effort it actually required. Years later, after completing his military service, people who worked with him noticed that same attitude had never disappeared. During an interview with Weverse magazine, J-Hope reflected on his time in the military and explained that he deliberately tried to create a positive environment for everyone around him. He says his actions would determine how people remembered him, so he chose to respect others, maintain healthy boundaries, and make those around him feel comfortable. Former soldiers later shared warm stories describing exactly that experience. That philosophy wasn't limited to military life. It was the same approach many BTS staff members had quietly observed for years. One production assistant says, "He greeted everyone before focusing on himself." Another stylist answers, "You could feel his respect even during the busiest schedules." Those moments rarely appeared on camera. There were no dramatic headlines. No viral clips. Just small acts repeated every single day. Even while carrying the nickname BTS's Sunshine, J-Hope has admitted that the label sometimes creates pressure. He explains that all 7 members must function as one team, and because of that, he constantly thinks about maintaining the group's energy without overshadowing anyone else. He describes himself as someone who tries to give positive energy while carefully protecting the balance within BTS. That confession surprised many fans. The happiest member wasn't simply born optimistic. He worked to become that person. Sometimes despite his own worries. Sometimes despite exhaustion. Sometimes because everyone else needed hope first. One crew member says, "People think his smile just happens." Another producer responds, "After working with him, You realize it's part of his professionalism. That may be the greatest lesson hidden behind J-Hope's public image. Real positivity isn't pretending everything is perfect. It's choosing to lift everyone else, even when you're carrying pressure yourself. The cameras captured BTS's brightest smile. The crew witnessed the discipline, sacrifice, and emotional responsibility that kept that smile alive. But that wasn't the most emotional confession yet. Because the next story belongs to a member whose quiet personality often hid emotions so deep that even longtime staff admitted they didn't fully understand him until they worked beside him. Number 4. Suga, BTS. Silence can be louder than applause. That may be the most surprising confession people behind the scenes have shared about Suga. Fans often see him as the quiet one, the producer who speaks only when necessary, the member whose calm expression rarely changes, even during the biggest moments. But according to directors, producers, and staff who have worked closely with him, that silence never meant distance. It usually meant he was thinking, observing, or quietly carrying more pressure than anyone realized. When preparing his D-Day World Tour, the production team quickly discovered that creating a concert with Suga was unlike working on an ordinary live show. The goal wasn't simply to entertain thousands of fans. It was to tell the story of Yoongi's entire journey. Every stage, every visual, every transition, every lighting cue, everything had to reflect who he truly was. Performance producer Ha Jong-jae explains that preparing the tour involved countless long conversations with Suga. They discussed old memories, current emotions, future dreams. He says the entire team first had to understand Yoongi as a person before they could build the concert around him. One production designer says, "This wasn't just another concert." Another creative director replies, "We had to synchronize ourselves with who Yoongi really was." That confession says everything. The production wasn't revolving around flashy visuals. It revolved around understanding one human being. And that process took far longer than anyone expected. Every creative decision invited another discussion. Every discussion led to another revision. The crew often found themselves rebuilding ideas they thought had already been finished. Not because Suga kept changing his mind, but because he refused to settle for something that didn't honestly represent his story. One stage director says, "We couldn't separate stage design, production, and storytelling." Another staff member answers, "Everyone had to build everything together from the very beginning." It required patience from the entire crew, but it also created one of the most personal performances BTS had ever produced. The irony was striking. Fans saw a performer standing alone under bright lights. The staff saw dozens of people working together because one artist insisted every detail carry emotional meaning. Yet despite that perfectionism, those closest to him described Suga as remarkably respectful. During the making of Road to D-Day, Suga openly admitted that there are moments when he becomes emotionally exhausted. He says there are times he listens to his own song, People, and simply cries. Not because success erased his struggles, but because success never erased his humanity. That honesty changed the atmosphere around him. One documentary producer says, "He never pretended everything was fine." Another editor responds, "His honesty made everyone else more honest too." Instead of hiding difficult emotions from the crew, Suga often allowed them to become part of the creative process. That trust transformed ordinary production meetings into meaningful conversations. But pressure never disappeared. As BTS grew into one of the biggest groups in the world, expectations surrounding Suga only became heavier. He wasn't just writing songs for himself anymore. He was producing music that millions of people would hear. In a Weverse magazine interview, Suga explains that when producing for other artists, he constantly balances his own musical identity with what listeners expect. He says he asks himself what each creative compromise will achieve rather than simply insisting on his own preferences. For him, great production is about finding that balance. One music engineer says, he notices details most people never hear. Another producer replies, that's why recording sessions with him are incredibly demanding. Nobody said the work was easy, but nearly everyone agreed it was worth it, because Suga never demanded perfection from others without demanding even more from himself first. Perhaps that's why so many collaborators continue describing him in similar ways. Quiet, thoughtful, relentlessly focused, never loud for the sake of attention, always committed to making the final result better than the first draft. The audience remembers unforgettable performances. The staff remembers the long nights, the difficult conversations, the countless revisions, and the quiet producer who believed every minute spent improving the work would eventually reach someone's heart. That may be the biggest misunderstanding about Suga. People often mistake silence for distance. The crew discovered it was actually where his deepest passion lived. But the confessions were becoming even more personal, because the next BTS member surprised staff in a completely different way by hiding enormous pressure behind one of the brightest smiles anyone had ever seen. Number 3. Jimin, BTS. Behind every flawless performance was a struggle that almost nobody could see. Fans watched Jimin glide across the stage with unbelievable precision. They saw elegance, confidence, perfection. But the producers and staff working closest to him tell a very different story. According to them, Jimin was often the person least satisfied with his own performance. Not because anyone else thought it wasn't good enough, because he believed it could always be better. During the production of BTS's Proof album, Jimin openly admitted something that perfectly explains why so many staff members describe him as one of the hardest workers in the room. Jimin says, "I kept saying, I'll try it again from the top." He explains that even after the recording was officially finished, he repeatedly asked the producer if he could record the entire song again. Not once, not twice, again and again, because every new attempt felt slightly closer to what he wanted listeners to hear. One producer says, "We thought we had already finished." Another engineer responds, then Jimin quietly asked if he could try one more complete take. Nobody forced him. Nobody demanded perfection. The pressure came entirely from himself. That became one of the biggest confessions from people working behind the scenes. The audience heard a beautiful final recording. The staff remembered the dozens of invisible decisions that created it. Every small adjustment mattered. A softer note, a different emotion, a slightly gentler pronunciation. To most listeners, those changes would probably go unnoticed. To Jimin, they changed everything. The irony was impossible to ignore. Millions of fans admired his confidence. The production team watched someone constantly questioning whether he had done enough. That mindset extended far beyond the recording booth. In the same interview, Jimin admits he has never been completely satisfied with himself. He says, "I want to be better and cooler." He explains that he used to convince himself he was already good enough, but eventually realized he wanted to keep growing instead of accepting comfort. That confession suddenly explained years of observations from choreographers and performance directors. One dance staff member says, he noticed mistakes nobody else noticed. Another rehearsal assistant answers, "Sometimes we'd think everything looked perfect, but Jimin would already be asking for another run." Not because he wanted attention, because he genuinely believed the audience deserved the best version of himself. But that level of dedication came with an emotional price. Perfection is a difficult destination because it never truly exists. The closer he came, the further away it seemed. Jimin has also spoken honestly about taking his work so seriously because he never wanted BTS's relationship with ARMY to become something mechanical. He explains that once people become mentally and physically exhausted, work starts feeling like a chore and relationships inevitably suffer. For him, protecting that emotional connection mattered just as much as delivering a perfect performance. One creative producer says, "He never talked about impressing people." Another staff member replies, "He talked about reaching people." That small difference changed the entire atmosphere around him. Instead of chasing applause alone, he chased sincerity. Years later, collaborators working on his solo projects continued describing exactly the same habit. Producers behind Muse explained that Jimin was deeply involved in shaping every emotional detail, carefully communicating the feelings he wanted listeners to experience rather than simply accepting the first version that worked. That consistency amazed the people around him. The cameras captured one of the world's greatest performers. The staff witnessed countless unseen hours spent trying to become just a little better than yesterday. One producer says, "Most artists celebrate when they're finished." Another engineer answers, "Jimin usually asks whether there's still something he can improve." Perhaps that's the biggest misunderstanding about him. People often mistake perfection for talent. The crew discovered it was built through patience, self-doubt, discipline, and an almost endless willingness to begin again. The audience remembers breathtaking performances. The people behind the scenes remember hearing the same quiet sentence over and over. "Can I try one more time?" Sometimes, that single question said more about Park Jimin than any award ever could. But the most unforgettable confession was still waiting. Because the next BTS member surprised everyone, not with perfectionism, but with a level of quiet loyalty and emotional strength that staff members say held the entire team together when nobody else was looking. Number 2. Jungkook, BTS. Sometimes the people who look the most fearless are carrying the heaviest expectations. That was one of the biggest surprises staff members discovered while working with Jungkook. Fans know him as the Golden Magne, the member who seems able to sing, dance, perform, direct, and master almost anything he touches. From the outside, his success looked effortless. But behind the cameras, producers and crew witnessed something completely different. They saw someone who almost never believed he had done enough. Long before BTS filled stadiums around the world, Jungkook had already developed a habit that people around him couldn't ignore. Whenever filming ended, he wasn't thinking about celebrating. He was thinking about improving. A staff member says, "Everyone else was ready to move on." Another producer replies, "Jungkook was already asking how the next project could be even better." That mindset became even more visible during BTS's B era. When Jungkook took part in directing the music video for Life Goes On, he wasn't interested in making himself the center of attention. Instead, he focused on the other 6 members. Jungkook explains that because it was BTS's music video, not his own, he wanted viewers to feel the emotions of every member rather than only his personal perspective. He even says he naturally prefers filming the others instead of putting himself in front of the camera. One crew member says, "Most people would use their first directing opportunity to showcase themselves." Another staff member responds, "Jungkook kept asking how the team could look better together." That answer surprised many people behind the scenes. It perfectly reflected the way he approached almost everything. The spotlight never mattered as much as the group. But that attitude came with enormous pressure. As BTS became one of the biggest music acts in history, expectations surrounding Jungkook grew higher every single year. Fans expected perfection. The media expected perfection. The industry expected perfection. And perhaps nobody expected more from Jungkook than Jungkook himself. In another candid interview, he openly admits that he constantly thinks about the future. He says if he spends an entire day doing nothing, he regrets it. That feeling pushes him to keep setting new goals, because otherwise he worries he won't move forward. He even jokingly calls himself lazy, despite acknowledging that he continuously pushes himself to improve as an artist. The irony couldn't have been greater. Millions of people admired him because he looked naturally gifted. The production staff admired him because they knew how much invisible effort existed behind that image. One recording engineer says, "People think talent is enough." Another producer answers, "Talent only explains where he started. His discipline explains where he is now." That discipline became obvious in countless ordinary moments. He reviewed recordings, watched performances, learned new skills, and rarely allowed himself to become comfortable. Even while directing Life Goes On, Jungkook explained that working alongside professional directors taught him how much preparation was required before filming even began. Rather than pretending he already knew everything, he carefully absorbed every lesson from the experienced crew around him. Perhaps that's why staff members consistently describe him as remarkably humble despite his global fame. One assistant director says, "He listened more than he talked." Another cinematographer replies, "That curiosity made everyone want to help him succeed." His willingness to learn changed the atmosphere on set. There was no sense of superiority, only genuine curiosity. only the desire to become better than yesterday. Then came one of the most revealing moments. When asked what he wanted to say to ARMY after years together, Jungkook didn't talk about awards. He didn't mention records. Instead, he compared BTS and their fans to people running the same race together. He explained that if one person becomes tired, the others help pull them forward. Then, he quietly added that BTS could only repay that support by giving everything through their music and performances. One producer says, "That's exactly how he worked every day." Another staff member answers, "He wasn't performing because he had to. He performed because he genuinely believed people deserved his very best." That single belief transformed everything. The audience saw confidence. The crew witnessed responsibility. The world celebrated the golden magne. The people standing closest to him saw a young artist carrying expectations so heavy that he refused to stop growing, even after reaching the very top. Perhaps that's the greatest confession of all. Jungkook's greatest strength was never simply his talent. It was his refusal to let talent become an excuse to stop improving. And what happened next was even more emotional. Because the final confession isn't about the strongest performer or the funniest member. It's about the person many staff quietly believe held BTS together during their hardest moments and why his kindness became unforgettable. Number 1. Taehyung, BTS. The biggest confession from BTS staff wasn't about the loudest member. It wasn't about the funniest, or even the most technically perfect. It was about someone many people completely misunderstood. Kim Taehyung. V. Fans often describe him as unpredictable. Quiet one moment, playful the next. Someone impossible to read. But according to directors, photographers, producers, and staff who spent countless hours working beside him, there was one trait that consistently surprised everyone. His extraordinary sensitivity. Not weakness. Sensitivity. The kind that notices details almost nobody else sees. During the preparation for his solo album Layover, creative director Min Hee-jin explained that the entire project was built around understanding V's natural personality instead of forcing him into a manufactured image. Rather than asking him to become someone different, the production team carefully observed the small habits, emotions, and atmosphere that made Kim Taehyung unique. The result wasn't simply an album. It became a portrait of who he really was. One creative director says, "We didn't want to create a character." Another producer responds, "We wanted people to meet the real Taehyung." That simple philosophy changed everything. Instead of chasing trends, they chased honesty. Instead of creating louder performances, they searched for quieter emotions. For many staff members, that process revealed something unexpected. Behind V's calm expression was someone deeply involved in every emotional detail. He wasn't interested in looking impressive. He cared about how people would feel. Every camera angle, every facial expression, every pause, every silence. Everything had emotional purpose. That surprised the production team, because many people assumed his natural charisma made everything effortless. The reality was very different. One photographer says, "He often stayed longer discussing tiny details." Another stylist replies, "People only see the finished result." We watched him think about every feeling behind it. The contrast couldn't have been greater. The audience saw effortless beauty. The crew witnessed careful preparation. Years before Layover, V had already revealed something remarkably personal during an interview. He said, "I have a desire to perfect one cool thing about myself." He wasn't talking about becoming perfect in every area. He simply wanted to create something timeless that genuinely represented him. That quiet ambition became one of the defining themes of his artistic journey. But perhaps the most emotional confession wasn't about music at all. It was about people. Throughout multiple official interviews, V repeatedly spoke about missing ARMY more than any achievement. During BTS's B era, while the world was still separated by the pandemic, he simply said, "I wish we were back with ARMY, laughing together." Not selling albums. Not breaking records. Laughing together. That single sentence revealed what mattered most to him. One production assistant says, "Whenever fans were mentioned, his expression changed immediately." Another crew member answers, You could tell those feelings weren't for the cameras. That sincerity left a lasting impression, not because it sounded dramatic, because it felt genuine. Then came one of the hardest periods BTS had ever experienced. Global fame continued growing. Schedules became more demanding. Privacy became increasingly difficult. Every appearance generated headlines. Every expression was analyzed. Every silence invited speculation. Yet people who worked beside V often described someone trying to protect his authentic self despite enormous public pressure. One documentary staff member says, "The biggest challenge wasn't creating beautiful images." Another editor responds, "It was capturing someone who was already trying to stay true to himself." That emotional struggle became visible to those closest to him, not through dramatic speeches, but through quiet consistency, through patience, through kindness, through choosing authenticity when pretending would have been easier. Perhaps that's why fellow BTS members have repeatedly spoken about V's unique role within the group. Jimin says, "V plays a big role in the team." He adds that Taehyung has many charms that fans don't always get to see and hopes more people will discover that side of him someday. That may be the greatest confession of all. The world celebrated V for his visuals. The people behind the scenes remembered his heart. They remembered someone who quietly listened before speaking. Someone who respected every member of the staff. Someone who believed emotions mattered more than perfection. Someone who never stopped trying to become a better artist without losing himself in the process. One producer says, "People usually remember celebrities because of their talent." Another crew member quietly replies, "We'll remember Taehyung because of how he made people feel." And maybe that's the greatest irony behind BTS. Fans fell in love with 7 extraordinary performers. The staff fell in love with 7 ordinary human beings who never forgot to say thank you. The cameras captured history. The people behind those cameras witnessed something even more unforgettable. Character, respect, humility, and the quiet moments that no audience could ever see. In the end, those unseen moments became the real legacy that so many staff members continue talking about years later. Because fame may fill stadiums, but kindness is what people remember long after the lights go out.